ESPN was comparing this year's All-Star Game to 2023. Why? Why in the hell would they do that?
It's fine to just say, just post the ratings. But, it is another situation than pretending like Caitlin Clark doesn't exist.
Something strange is happening at ESPN, and fans are starting to notice. The WNBA All-Star Game just wrapped, and the headlines were glowing. Historic viewership, they said. Second most watched game ever. Sounds like a win, right? Well, not so fast. Because if you look a little deeper, the numbers tell a totally different story. And the player missing from that court, Caitlin Clark, is the reason why. ESPN says ratings are booming, but they're hiding something big. They want you to believe women's basketball is thriving without Caitlin. But what if I told you the truth is, without her, the WNBA's momentum collapses almost instantly? What if the league's record-breaking All-Star Game was actually a 36% drop in viewership from last year? And what if ESPN deliberately spun the stats to cover it up? Because that's exactly what just happened.
This is historic. They were scored historic viewership. How is it historic when it's half of last year? Last year was nearly 4 million. How is it historic?
From selective comparisons to mysterious data gaps, this isn't just lazy reporting, it's intentional misdirection. And fans, they're done staying quiet. They caught the lie in real time and started calling it out. This video breaks down how ESPN is manipulating the truth, why the league seems terrified to give Caitlin Clark real credit, and what it means for the future of the WNBA. If you're tired of the spin, like this video. If you want the unfiltered truth about Caitlin Clark and the league she's carrying, hit that subscribe button. Let's pull back the curtain, because the numbers don't lie. But ESPN? They sure try to. Let's start with the oldest play in ESPN's playbook, the comparison game. Every major media outlet knows this trick. If the numbers don't tell the story you want, change what you're comparing them to. And that's exactly what ESPN did after the 2025 WNBA draft. They proudly reported a 119% spike in viewership, calling it a huge success for the league. But hold up, what exactly were they comparing it to?
Not 2024, not Caitlin Clark's draft, which drew 2.45 million viewers, the highest in league history. No, they reached all the way back to a year before she even entered the league. 2023. Why? Because if they'd compared it to 2024, the numbers would tell a very different story. Instead of a 119% increase, we'd be talking about a 49% decline. Let that sink in. The league's biggest night outside of the finals lost nearly half its audience year over year, and ESPN decided not to mention it, not even in fine print. This isn't about getting the numbers wrong. The 119% stat is technically true, but that's the trick. They cherry-pick stats that look impressive and quietly ignore the ones that expose the real trend. In Caitlin Clark's numbers, they expose everything. Because without her, the WNBA surge disappears. So instead of owning that, ESPN manipulates the optics, choosing narratives over facts. But here's the thing, they've done it before, and we're just getting started.
This is another example of the mainstream media protecting the WNBA.
Next up, March Madness, where the deception gets even worse. Once you spot the pattern, you can't unsee it. ESPN isn't making one-off mistakes. They've created a blueprint for how to spin numbers whenever Caitlin Clark is involved. Take March Madness 2025. In the early rounds, Round 2, Sweet 16, and the Elite 8, ESPN loudly compared viewership to 2023. And since Caitlin was part of that 2023 tournament, at first glance that seemed fair. But something strange happened once the tournament reached the Final Four and the National Championship, the exact rounds where Caitlin made history in both 2023 and 2024. Suddenly, ESPN stopped comparing. No more side-by-side charts, no more percentage increases or drops. Just one vague line, third highest Final Four viewership ever. Sounds great, until you remember what the 2 years ahead of it were, 2023 and 2024, both years when Caitlin Clark was in the Final Four.
Translation, without her in 2025, viewership cratered by over 10 million. But instead of reporting that, ESPN pivoted. They switched to metrics, avoided comparisons, and leaned into vague phrasing. Why? Because if they showed the real drop, they'd have to admit something they clearly don't want to say. Caitlin Clark doesn't just bring fans, she is the fan magnet. And the moment she's gone, so are the numbers. It's not a coincidence. It's not accidental. It's a calculated strategy. Mention Caitlin only when the numbers work in your favor. And when they don't, silence. But here's the twist. In trying to erase her, ESPN made her impact louder. Here's where ESPN's whole plan backfires, because by trying to bury Caitlin Clark's influence, they accidentally amplified it. It's called the Streisand effect, when you try to hide or suppress something, and in doing so, you draw even more attention to it. That's exactly what happened with ESPN's carefully worded headlines and cherry-picked data. They thought fans wouldn't notice. They assumed most people would just skim the press release, see 2.2 million viewers and up 158%, and call it a win. Wrong. Caitlin Clark's fans are dialed in, and they caught the spin instantly. The post comparing the 2025 All-Star Game to 2023 flooded with replies asking, "Where's the 2024 comparison? Why skip the year Caitlin actually played? Why ignore the 3.4 million record?" And just like that, ESPN's attempt to frame a 36% drop as a win turned into a trending topic for all the wrong reasons. The thing is, this isn't even about bashing the league. 2.2 million is actually solid for the WNBA. But when you try to call that historic while pretending last year didn't exist, it insults the audience. You're not reporting the news, you're pushing a narrative. And in doing so, you make Caitlin's importance undeniable. Because now, even her absence makes headlines. Even when she's not playing, fans are dissecting the ratings and asking where she went. That's not normal. That's not manufactured hype. That's star power.
And it scares the people trying to control the message. You'd think that when an athlete transforms an entire sport's popularity, the league would celebrate her, embrace her, put her front and center. But with Caitlin Clark, the WNBA seems terrified to do that. When she won Time's Athlete of the Year, backlash followed immediately, not from fans, but from within the league itself. Critics demanded all WNBA players be included on the cover, as if it was a group project, as if Clark didn't individually outdraw the league's biggest stars combined. Funny how that standard only applies to her. When A'ja Wilson, Breanna Stewart, or Nafisa Collier get featured on magazine covers, nobody's crying foul or asking for a group photo. But with Caitlin, suddenly it's unfair. Then came the ESPYs, where she won Best Player, a huge honor. But even in victory, praise had to be felt. Her own coach was interviewed about the award, and instead of simply celebrating Caitlin's success, she immediately shifted focus to other players, mentioning Stewie, A'ja, even Sue Bird, almost like saying Caitlin didn't earn it alone. It was praise with a footnote, every time. This isn't just awkward, it's political. It shows how fragile the WNBA's internal dynamics really are. Giving Caitlin full credit feels dangerous, like it might upset a fragile hierarchy. But here's the irony. By constantly trying to dilute her spotlight, they're just proving how bright it really is. Because if Caitlin wasn't dominating the narrative, why are they so scared to say her name without adding a disclaimer? When you can't discredit the player, go after the people who support her. That's the new strategy. And it's getting uglier by the day.
Caitlin Clark's fans, who have shown up in record numbers, sold out arenas, and turned TV ratings into must-watch events, are now being portrayed as the problem. Not passionate, not loyal, but toxic. The media started it subtly. Caitlin wouldn't be this famous without the Angel Reese moment. Okay, fine. Debate the origin of her stardom all you want. But then it escalated.
Some analysts began blaming her fans for ruining the WNBA experience, saying they were sucking the life out of the league, were entitled, or didn't support the league's values. Suddenly, liking Caitlin Clark meant you were against social justice, or against other players, or even worse, just flat-out racist. Even WNBA players joined in. They said, fans say things to us they wouldn't say at their own jobs. They called for tighter control, more protection from their own audience. And then, the Phoenix Mercury suddenly suggested Indianapolis, Caitlin's city, wasn't safe. Let that sink in. The league is throwing shade at its largest fan base for supporting the one player that's keeping it alive.
And for what? This isn't just tone deaf, it's self-sabotage. Because if you alienate the fans who are putting real money into the league, you're not protecting women's basketball. You're burning it down from the inside. And it all came to a head on All-Star Weekend. The 2025 WNBA All-Star Game was supposed to be a celebration, the league's biggest night. But when Caitlin Clark was ruled out due to injury, everything changed. Ticket prices immediately dropped 48%. That's not a blip, that's a collapse. Overnight, demand evaporated. Still, the players tried to rally. They marched onto the court wearing protest shirts that read, "Pay us what you owe us." A bold move, but also a gamble. With the league losing millions annually and viewership so heavily reliant on one rookie, this was their moment to prove they could carry the stage without her. And for a brief second, it looked promising.
The skills competition and three-point contest actually broke records, up 89% over last year. ESPN made sure everyone knew. They compared those numbers to 2024, a fair and accurate benchmark. But then came the main event, the actual All-Star Game. And suddenly, ESPN flipped the script. Instead of comparing to last year's 3.4 million viewers, Caitlin's record-setting game, they compared it to 2023. You know, the pre-Caitlin era. Why? Because this year's game pulled 2.2 million viewers, down 36% from 2024. That's a 1.2 million viewer drop, a loss they couldn't afford to admit, so they buried it, reframed it, spun it as an historic night. But fans saw through it, because how is a 36% drop historic? It's not. It's embarrassing. And instead of focusing on the fans or the sold-out crowd, some players chose that moment to take shots at Caitlin. One in particular, Kelsey Plum. If there was ever a moment to unite, this was it. The 2025 All-Star Game had wrapped. Despite Caitlin Clark being sidelined, it still managed to draw the second largest audience in WNBA All-Star history. The fans showed up. The city of Indianapolis showed love. It was the perfect chance to say, "We did this together." But Kelsey Plum had other ideas. In the post-game press conference, she took the mic and called out Team Clark, not subtly, but directly. She pointed out that 0 members of Team Clark were present at the players' pre-game meeting to coordinate the protest shirts. Then she shrugged it off like a joke, but the damage was already done. It was a shot fired during Caitlin's injury absence, in her home market, at an event where she was being honored. And it was personal. Even Sabrina Ionescu's face said it all. Her awkward reaction when Plum made the comment went viral. She looked stunned, like even she knew that wasn't the time.
Because here's the truth. When your league is struggling to hold attention without one player, the last thing you do is alienate her or her fans. But that's exactly what Plum did. NBA champion and broadcaster Stacey King summed it up perfectly. As you're fighting for better salaries, you still find a way to throw shade at Caitlin Clark. Why? He wasn't alone. Social media erupted, and not in the way the WNBA had hoped. And it got worse. Because the people who actually hold power, they're watching too. When fans noticed the ratings dip from 3.4 million to 2.2 million viewers, they didn't stay quiet. Social media lit up with questions. Why was ESPN comparing this year's All-Star Game to 2023 instead of 2024, when Caitlin Clark made history? The answer? Damage control.
By using 2023 as the baseline, ESPN could spin the story. All-Star ratings are up, they claimed, but only because 2023 was a low point. They knew exactly what they were doing. It was never about transparency, it was about narrative control. And it backfired. ESPN's own graphics went viral, in the worst way. Fans flooded the comments with side-by-side comparisons, pointing out how ESPN ignored the 36% drop from Caitlyn's rookie debut the year prior. People weren't just disappointed, they were angry. They felt insulted, manipulated, lied to. Because fans remember. They know that the only time the WNBA cracked 3 million viewers was when Caitlin Clark suited up. And they know this year's 2.2 million wouldn't have happened without the buzz she created in the months leading up to it. Even journalists began questioning the ethics of the spin. It wasn't just fans anymore, it was media versus media. And the league? Silent.
The same league that rushed to celebrate an 89% increase in the skills competition wouldn't address the elephant in the room, that the one player who wasn't even on the court still controlled the ratings. But that's the part they never want to admit. They can twist the numbers, they can take shots at her, they can even try to turn her fans into villains. But one thing's become crystal clear. Caitlin Clark runs the WNBA. When she plays, records break. When she sits, everything changes, from ticket sales to TV ratings, and no amount of spin can cover that up. The league says it wants growth. The players say they want respect. But tearing down the one person bringing in the spotlight isn't just bitter, it's self-destructive. This isn't about worshiping a rookie, it's about being honest. The game needs her. So if the WNBA wants to keep rising, it's time to stop fighting the wave and start riding it. Because the moment you lose Caitlin Clark, you lose everything.